Thanks for coming back for part 3 of this Viking Seax build. Or if this is the first video you've watched, be sure to watch parts 1 and 2. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications button, the little bell. So this is part 3 of our Viking Seax build. In the first part, we forged a piece of antique wrought iron anchor chain and some pattern welded or Damascus steel together to forge the blade. And the second part was finishing that blade and fitting the first brass piece to the tang. And now it is time to put a handle on this sax. This is a piece of elk antler, and I had initially envisioned the idea of carving some heavy relief knotwork or something like that around the circumference of it. I realized that this material does not have enough thickness or depth to it, solid depth to it, to really do that like I wanted to. Plus, it was probably something I should practice before attempting on a project like this. So, fitting this to the tang and keeping it as tight a fit as possible without unnecessary voids. I need to fit it right up against that brass piece there as tightly as possible. Here I'm flattening this brass piece further, make sure there's no irregularities that are going to affect my fit up here, and then again flattening the antler piece as well. This is kind of a tedious process, but getting a nice tight fit up against that brass is kind of what's important here. So thinking about Viking Seaxes historically, we have quite a number of archaeological samples of the Viking Seax. And the sax itself is just a knife. The word just means knife. But typically, the ones people are most familiar with anyway, are a larger blade that was used in battle even. And this blade is between 11 and 12 inches long, so definitely a large dagger size that you could effectively at least defend yourself with, or perhaps use in conjunction with a shield or something like that. The second part of this handle is going to be some African blackwood, and while it may not be a material that was specifically used in the northern European regions and this kind of thing, I really like it because it's so dense and has a nice grain to it, and it's very dark, so we'll get a nice contrast against that elk antler with this material. So I really like that. But the Viking Seaxes that we have, from eons ago, they're all, as far as I'm aware, all of them are this stick or hidden tang, tapered tang, like the one we're building here. And I'm also not aware of any Viking Seaxes that actually have any kind of guard or bolster like this one does. So perhaps that's not entirely historically accurate, but that's not exactly the point of this project. I'm trying to keep it pretty close to what a historical sax looks like, but I do like the brass on the ends here to keep things tight and clean and protect the handle material. So I'm using, after drilling that block of wood out a little bit, I'm using the burn-in technique a little bit, burning, whatever, to get that tang further up that piece of wood. Now, you can use this to do a complete fit, which I'm not going to do here. I'm going to get it close, as you'll see. But what I was going to say about the Viking Seaxes historically is they don't have guards on them, as far as we know. At least those parts didn't survive. And so it's very likely that most of them, or many of them, the handles were simply a piece of material like bone or antler or wood in which a hole was burnt or bored out and then driven onto the tang. And so I imagine a number of them were rather rudimentary, you know, design and construction, and perhaps that's an explanation as to why, as far as I'm aware, we don't have any surviving examples of any guards or bolsters or pommels or anything on the Seax, just the knife in the tang itself. So here I'm using my little carving tool to carve and scrape out the burnt material inside that block of wood, and so finishing up that fit, with some clean material. And I'm fitting the brass plate here. So the tang at the end here is not round, and I could make it so, but here I am. I've got a hole drilled in the brass plate, and I'm heating it up and driving it down to achieve a perfectly tight fit around that tang, so there's no gaps around the tang, between the tang and the brass plate here. I'm also burning it in against the back of the block of wood, which also achieves a perfectly tight and mated fit too. This is not something I've done before, but actually it is exactly the kind of thing that you do if you hot fit a horseshoe, which I have done a number of times before. And so you get a perfect fit against the hoof of a horse when you hot fit the shoe to it, in the same manner as this right here. What I'm doing here is making quite sure that the very tip of the tang is as soft as possible. And what in the process I'm using here is spheroidizing, and that is heating it up to about 1350 degrees, making sure that it's below austenizing temperature, so less than 1400 or about 1400 or less. And that will segregate the carbides within the steel and allow it to be as soft as possible. You have to be careful when you do that you don't heat it up to austenizing temperature, which is, safe zone is below 1400, like I said, but like 1425 and up. You start to create austenite, which then creates perlite, which is really not what we want. And so just heating it up to a dull red, and I like to do that when the lights are down. So it's time to fit the handle to the tang, and what small amount of gaps or voids we have in there, we're filling that in with epoxy, making sure that those are not going to be an issue. But the overall fit up on this was quite nice, even without the epoxy. Pretty tight, so I was pretty happy with how it came out. Now this is my old, I guess, carpenter's vise of some sort that I'm sure I haven't used for what it's meant to be for, but I use it for tightening down the handles and such on hidden tang knives like this while the epoxy sets, if I'm not using a threaded tang, which I'm not here. Now, I wanted the whole assembly to be tight against the blade itself, and so you can see that I have the vise resting against the bench vise so that I can actually pull the whole handle assembly down onto the tang against the shoulders of the blade. Now it's time to cut the tang off and peen it down. The epoxy is set, it's not cured, so it's still soft. You can wait until it's completely cured, but I kind of like to do this, if possible, while the epoxy is still soft, so that as I peen that down, it pulls that handle assembly together even tighter, and the soft epoxy allows that to happen. So it went down nicely, and as you remember, about half of that tang on the end there is iron, the wrought iron, and the other half of it is the steel, which was what we were making sure was soft when I was doing that low red heat. And of course now it's time to shape the handle. And so, again, historically speaking, I'm not aware of really any, and there may be some, but by and large there's no handles that have survived the ages on Viking Seaxes. And so, I suppose you have a little bit of artistic license to make a handle, because we don't really have specific examples to go by, at least very few, if any. But I'm using a sort of a hourglass shape to the handle, which appears in various cultures. Actually, it's quite effective. It's comfortable in the hand and also quite secure, and so it makes for an effective and comfortable handle on a battle blade when you don't have a guard. A guard might be a nice addition, but this is not the type that has a guard, as we've talked about a minute ago. So there's the brass, and you can see that little lump of brass there where I actually started to melt it when I was heating it up the first time. I left it because it adds some neat character to it and makes it look maybe even more primitive, or closer to the era that we're trying to at least somewhat emulate. So I've got the entire handle sanded down to 600 grit, and I'm going to use the buffing wheel to polish up the antler and the black wood and the brass as well. You have to be careful when you're doing this. You can overheat, especially the antler. If you buff it too quickly or too much in one spot, you can overheat and burn the antler, and then you get a nasty brown spot on your clean white antler, which is certainly not what we want. This is a Danish oil that I'm applying to the handle here on both the antler and the wood. And alternatively, you could apply oil first and then buff it, which is what I do often, but it does soak in nonetheless. This is something I haven't done before, but I thought I'd try it. Just this idea kind of came to me. This is beeswax. So I'm rubbing it onto the handle and burnishing it on with a soft cotton cloth in a shoe shine style. And it actually worked quite well. It provided a even nice sheen of beeswax on the handle, which was quite polished and had a sort of not tacky, but almost tacky feel to it. And so it was nice to enhance the grip on the handle as well, and of course protects the material, the antler and the wood. So I'm stamping my compass mark into the blade here, tilted to the northwest. And I'm able to do that, of course, because the wrought iron does not harden, and so it is still soft enough to take that maker's mark. And it's kind of an interesting thing there, being able to put your maker's mark on the blade, on the weapon, almost as the very last step when the weapon is, or the blade is almost completely finished. Not something you typically get to do. You saw me on there on the vise drawing the blade over some sandpaper wrapped around the bar of steel, and that is to put the final hand rubbed finish into the blade. Even though this is etched Damascus and wrought iron, that provides a consistent finish. So we've sharpened the blade, and there's the cut test. Does brilliantly. So going for another go here, because I have some cardboard left, and it's a lot of fun. So the downstroke is pretty easy, but this is another story right here, an upstroke, something that you might require. I might require a little more practice at, but still the blade does quite well, almost severs through it. And I have enough cardboard for one more cut here. And something wasn't quite right there. It didn't cut through, and it should have. So retrieving the piece of cardboard, and this is packaging that some knife steel came in, I discovered the issue, much to my chagrin. A large packaging staple that the blade did not cut all the way through, but certainly did bite into. And yeah, that's why the third cut didn't work so well. So let's look at the edge here. It did have some glinting on it, some slight, I don't know, rolling maybe, or compression, but no chips, I don't think you can really even see it in the video here, any damage to the edge at all, and sharpened up very easily, reasonably easily, as you would expect, and back to a razor sharp edge. So this is our completed Seax, and I really like how the blade turned out. The different characteristics, that wrought iron at the top there in this picture, and then the multiple layers of the saw blade 15 and 20 steel in between our high layer count Damascus or pattern welded steel. So pretty happy with the way it turned out. I think it has a really good look for the blade that it is, for the project that it is here. Anyways, I appreciate you guys watching, and as always, we will see you on the next video.